Okay, so we have probably all made a burrito style, enchilada style, taco style, chimichanga style, whatever you want to call I made a pillowcase in a tube. That's what we're going to do, but we're going to do a little bit of a different spin on it. I like the British style pillowcases where the pillowcase comes over and your pillow actually tucks into the little pocket on the inside, but I still wanted to figure out how to do that as a burrito method. So this is what we're gonna do. Normally, when you do the burrito style, you have a 12-inch piece for your cuff, a 2-inch piece for your little flange. Got both of those. They are selvage to selvage. What I'm gonna do differently is on my main body fabric, instead of doing the selvage to selvage like we normally would, we're still gonna do that, but we're gonna have a longer piece of fabric. So instead of it being 3/4 of a yard to make one pillowcase, I've got 1 2/3 to make 2 pillowcases. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna set up our burrito like we normally would. Okay, so if you've never done a burrito pillowcase, I have a video that shows you the basics on making a burrito pillowcase. You can go back and watch those if you like. What we're gonna do is make one long piece first. So first step is to take the long end of your fabric. So this is selvage to selvage. I'm gonna take my flange. This is a binding maker that you don't have to use your iron for. So if you hate putting together a 2-inch strip and then pressing it, I cut mine at 2 1/4. So these binding makers come in 2 1/4 and 2 1/2. I usually make my bindings at 2 1/4 anyway. And since most of our hot dog pillowcases use a 2-inch strip, just cut it 2 1/4. You won't know the difference. The way these work is they've got these little rubberized handles and it's like a panini press. So you open it up, fold your fabric in half, and that's just as much as you have to do, just enough to get it in the holder. Put it through the little crack here. And as long as you start out with it lined up, close that down, and then you snap these little rubber things in there. So now I can just let the strip hang off the table. It is like making binding, but since I don't have to join strips, I only need one strip section. This is really easy. All I have to do is pull it through and it will fold my fabric in half and press it. So I don't have to press this tiny little strip, which isn't that big a deal, but this is just a really fun little tool to have. And when I first got this thing, I was super skeptical because I like my stuff to be folded and pressed really tight, really sharp folds. And this thing really does a good job. If you want to make it a little bit sharper, you could pass it through again. But honestly, for what we're doing, that's pretty great. I'll put it through again so you can see how much sharper it is. Make sure you follow the right direction on that arrow, because if you pull it through the other way, the wheels don't grab it right. So now it's already been folded in half, so you could even go a little bit faster. And it just keeps everything nice and flat. Yeah. So there's an extra little tip for making your hot dog or burrito or enchilada pillowcases. So I've got my flange. I'm going to put this here just to hold it for now by pinning it. I don't take my selvages off. I'm just going to leave the selvage ends on and match up the raw edges of all my fabric. They're going to come off later anyway. So I'm just going to hold this in place so I can put the other piece on. And I pressed this before I started, but then I folded it back up again. So there's a crease there that we're going to press out in the making. I have pre-washed and re-ironed all of this fabric. I find that if I pre-wash my fabric specifically for pillowcases, they fit much better when I wash them later. All right, I'm probably pinning this more than I need to, but I want to make sure it stays good and straight. Then I'm going to take my cuff and line up my edges again. But this fabric is quasi-directional. I wouldn't really call it directional, but the stems kind of go like that. So if I want it to show up this way on my pillowcase, I want to make sure that I pin it that direction. All right, now I'm going to leave my selvage pinned in there in place, and I'm going to pin these also. I put my pins this way on purpose because now I don't have to go back in and pull them out of my flange, and I don't have to worry about sewing over them. Okay, so all my pins are both on the top and inside the selvage in there, right? Or the flange is inside. Now here's the fun part. We're going to take all this fabric. What I typically like to do so that I can manage it all on one table is I'll take the bottom, kind of fold it in half. This is a lot of fabric on this table, but we can get there. It doesn't have to be perfect, but what you don't want to do is stitch on your inside fabric. So we're going to roll this up like a burrito, but not this part. Keep this part out. Then we're going to take this part and fold it over like the tortilla, right? Okay. So what you have here now, and that's a lot of fabric to keep flat, but you want to make sure you keep it really good and tucked in there. Now I can take the pins that I put on the other side and pin through all the layers. So we should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers. We're going to pin these and keep them really good and straight. Now this is the secret to success right here, is making sure that this edge is really straight so that you don't accidentally not catch this. So I'm just going to give you a couple of tips on how I get a better result. I know it seems a little fussy, but it's important to make sure this is all lined up straight. Okay, so now I have this big chunky burrito in here, okay? Kind of shake the fabric down a little bit so that it's not all bunched up. It makes it easier to get through the machine. Now you're going through a lot of layers, so if your machine doesn't really like to get through a lot of layers, you might want to use a walking foot. I am going to backstitch here and sew off the end. I am going to use a slightly wider seam allowance than I normally do. I know quilters see everything in a 1/4 inch, but I'm going to do more like a 3/8 inch, just because I want to make sure I catch all of that fabric in there. All right, we got a big old burrito. Now, if you want to, you can trim down your seam allowance. I don't usually, because this is all going to lay flat and get pressed flat. So the thickness isn't really going to matter. And in my experience, keeping the thickness gives it more stability. Now, you're still going to have some of your pins on the inside that are holding your flange in there, but don't worry about it. So we're going to grab a hold of the body of the pillowcase. I try to kind of get the edge if I can. And since we're putting twice as much fabric through here than we normally do when we make a burrito pillowcase, it might take a little bit more time to pull this through, but it's good and long, so you should get some leverage. And so now once you get all the fabric through the body, the whole cuff will turn itself inside out. So now we come back, pull all these pins out. So if you've never done the burrito method for pillowcase making, this really is, I think, not only the easiest way to make a pillowcase, but it's also the most stable, because that whole cuff is now right sides out and you don't have any raw seams. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this long piece of fabric, and it's a long piece of fabric. It's the whole 1 2/3 yards. Now what I've done is I'm actually making 2 pillowcases here. I'm going to press this so that this lays really nice and flat. So I'm going to press it up toward this side and flip it over and press it up toward this side. Okay, so on this end, the cuff is sewn and I pressed it. So I pressed this side up and I pressed this so it's nice and crisp. I typically like to go back again and top stitch right here in that ditch just to secure the whole thing. So we're going to go back and we're going to top stitch that right in the edge. And the other thing I did while I was at the iron was I took my other really long end and I folded it out under a 1/2 inch and then again a 1/2 inch, and I'm going to top stitch both here and here to make it really secure. So now we have a 1/2 inch hem on our raw edge. I've top stitched the flange down. And so now what we have is a whole bunch of fabric that's ready to do something with. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is get rid of my selvages. And I leave my selvages on when I'm doing this because it doesn't matter and I can trim all that off anyway. But I want to be sure that this is really straight before I do it. And remember, we're doing 2 pillowcases at once here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some creative folding. I'm going to match up my bottom ends here like that, and my hemmed edge is nice and straight. Then I'm going to match up the top part up here. So all my selvages are going to be going the same direction. All right, they're all nice and straight and organized mostly. Okay. And more importantly, the top of my pillowcases are straight. So this way, my fabric is all going in the same direction. All right, so the top of my pillowcases is all lined up. Make sure your fabric lays out smoothly. Then you can take a long ruler. This is another time I really like to use that 36-inch long ruler because this is longer than my 24. Okay, so make sure that if there's any creases in the case, you smooth them out before the cutting part. I'm right-handed, so that's not going to work. We're going to flip this over. I'm going to take my really long ruler, so I only have to lay it out once. I can take my long 36-inch ruler here, and the way I'm going to know what to cut is I really just want to get rid of the selvages. I want to keep as much of the pillowcase as I can. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a line on my ruler as a reference here in my flange and here at the top of my pillowcase and make sure it's all good and straight. It is. It looks pretty good. So I'm going to cut all of the selvage and the top of the pillowcase off. Okay, so we haven't really wasted anything yet. All we've cut off is selvage, which we're not going to use anyway. So there's that. Now, the other thing I need to do is I'm making 2 pillowcases out of this. So if I flip this over while it's all nice and happy, I can use the same ruler and cut off this fold. Okay, so everything's still lined up nice and straight. And since I don't have to move my ruler because my ruler's so long, and since my ruler doesn't slip, I can get through all of these pieces without too much struggle, except for right there. That's a big old bump. Okay, so now we have 2 pillowcases that are almost ready to go. So I'm going to take both of these, and the first seam, since I want French seams on this, I want to fold them wrong sides together. Okay, we're going to do both of them at the same time, but just to get the layout, I'm going to lay out one at a time. So now this looks like a pillowcase, right? I want to do the cuffed thing. So I want to have as big of an inside pocket as my outside cuff. So if my cuff is about a 6-inch cuff, I'm going to take a pin and put it right there at the bottom of my flange at both ends, just as a reference. Now I'm going to take this away. I'm going to fold that right there at that pin line. So I've got it all lined up. I've got my piece folded over. Here's my pin from folding it over. I'm going to take that pin out and use it to hold this together. So we're going to take the whole side of this pillowcase. You don't have to pin a whole bunch, but pin it so it doesn't wiggle away. And I know it feels upside down to put wrong sides together, but for a French seam, you sew the wrong sides first. Round. And we're also going to pin the other side. I'm going to pin the other one. Okay, so now we're going to sew this just like this, but I'm going to use this kind of a skinny seam. So on my first go, I usually use just a little bit less than 1/4 inch. If you can only see 1/4 inch, go ahead and sew 1/4 inch, and then you can trim the seam down. That part doesn't matter. But we're going to go ahead and sew it, and I'll be back. Okay, so this is about a 1/4 inch seam. So if you want to at this point, you can trim it down. You just want to make sure that you're going to catch it in the seam the next time. So typically what I do is I will use my 1/4 inch foot to piece this pass, and then I'll use my J foot and I'll put my needle in the middle so that I don't catch the seam. You don't want the fabric sticking through. That being said, there's still probably going to be some that sticks through, and then you can trim it off. So now I want to turn these inside out. Now we are going to do the sewing right sides together. So one of the things you want to do in this stage that I think a lot of people skip is you want to make sure you're poking your corners out really sharply before you top stitch them. So I'm using my precision point turner, and I'm going to get right up in that corner there, and see how when I roll the head of the turner, see how sharp that is? That's what I want, because I don't want my corners of my pillowcase to be rounded off or look like they're boxed. Okay, so get those nice and sharp. Now here's where this one's a little bit different. We're going to take this top cuff and poke it inside like that. So now you have your pillowcase is all folded inside of itself, and the cuff has a cuff. Okay, so typically what I'll do at this point is I will go and iron it. I want to make sure that I'm getting really sharp points right here before I sew them down. So I'm going to take this to my iron, and I'm going to press this out, because now when I sew my seam, I want to be sure that I'm catching that seam on the inside. So I am going to press it, and I'm going to take my point turner and run this along the inside of my pillowcase too before I press it. So see how nice and flat I can get my seams even before I take it to the iron, just by pushing it out like that. Okay, that's an extra step, but in my opinion, it makes your edges a lot more crisp, and it means that you catch your seams exactly where you want them. Okay, so this end has to be poked out as well. All right, so I'm gonna do that with all 4 sides of both my pillowcases, and I'm gonna press them, and then I'm gonna go back and top stitch this on my machine. My pillowcase that we just made, super fancy. And I pressed both sides, my finished pillowcase. So the measurements for this pillowcase fit like a queen size pillow. I will add the math for how much yardage you need to do a standard pillow as well as a king pillow. These are super fun. They make amazing gifts. I like to make a pair of these. Every quilt I give to someone, I like to make a pair of these out of either the fabric that's left over or complementary to it. A lot of times I have extra fabric for the backing, so I will make pillowcases from leftover fabric. Then I will fold them up really pretty and tuck them inside the quilt as part of the gift. So there you go. That's what we made.